Every time we walk into a new room, Resident Evil always leaves us worried about what's to come. So far, this Halloween season has really inspired me to go back and play some really scary horror games. With that being said, that made me want to go back to my favorite Resident Evil games and try and break down what I think is the scariest rooms and locations of the series. So sit back and get ready as I break down my top 10 scariest rooms and locations of Resident Evil. This list was completely compiled together by yours truly, so please let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with my top 10 list. But let's go ahead and get into number 10. When originally making this video, I wanted it to be a top 10 scariest rooms, but there was a lot of entries in this list, including this one, that made it to where I couldn't just title it rooms, because this is more so an entire location that really stood out to me when I started playing Resident Evil when I was a kid. The Crocodile Swamp from the Marshlands in Resident Evil 5 is making number 10 on this list. This spot truly stood out to me when playing Resident Evil 5 in my early years of discovering the series. When playing for the first time and not having infinite ammo or strong weapons, these things can actually take you out with one singular attack while your weapons don't do anything to them. It's one of those things where you would have really had to have been there at the time as a kid to know truly how scary that was. Coming in at number 9 on this list is the Observation Room from Resident Evil 2, inside the RPD. Whether or not it's the original or the remake of RE2, this section of the RPD is truly one of the best jump scares I think we have ever gotten in the entire series. Truly nothing beats it because I have played this game a dozen times and I swear that this gets me every single time. The remake version scared me quite a bit as well, even though I was expecting it, but I think the original is truly where that place holds its spot in the number 9 ranking, because I was a lot younger when experiencing that, and when you're 16 years old and you're expecting this game, it's not as scary as when you're playing it for the first time at 7. Making its way at number 8 in this top 10 list, which I think is a little bit of an underrated location in Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is the Rockford prison bedrooms. The atmosphere and just the pure sight of it when you walk in is already pretty creepy as is, but it does hold a lot of fear because of the zombie that breaks through the window and leaves you at a pretty cornered moment there. If you're someone who's scared of the zombies or scared of using ammo and wants to just run past everything, that room makes it so you can't do that because there is just so many zombies that block the entry point. Also, the file in that room describes some pretty creepy stuff.
It's on its case!
As much fun as I've had while playing Resident Evil 6, it was never one of my favorites in the series, so even I'm kind of surprised that Resident Evil 6 had anything in it at all that was actually scary. But I actually do believe that the only part of Resident Evil 6 that was actually scary or actually resembles the horror genre that Resident Evil once was Jake's story in Resident Evil 6. I would say easily the scariest part of RE6 is Ustanok and every moment that he's actually just chasing you down, which a lot of it is inside the ice caves. I also really thought the atmosphere was pretty good with the snow setting, which most RE games don't have. Making its way at number 6 on this top 10 list is the Baker House morgue, located in the basement. Something about the idea of just being in a morgue by itself is pretty scary, but when you account the fact that pretty creepy molded enemies are coming at you and whatnot, it just makes it a lot more terrifying. And to be specific, this morgue in the Baker house is a pretty small room, so it makes it really difficult to actually fight anything at all. But now let's get into the top 5.
Nice place to set up house.
Coming in at number 5 on this list is definitely one that's a location instead of just a room, and that is the underground mansion in Resident Evil Revelations 2. It was hard to find a singular room to put in this list, as most of this mansion is pretty creepy altogether. I think one of the most underrated jump scares in all of Resident Evil is when this god dang revenant just falls through the ceiling inside the mansion. A lot like the two-way mirror in RE2, this jump scare gets me every single time. In my opinion, the underground mansion in Revelations 2 is by far the scariest location in the game. Making its way into the top 4 of the scariest rooms and locations of Resident Evil, we have the subway power station from Resident Evil 3 Remake. If it wasn't for the design and the amount of drain demos in this section, and my chronic arachnophobia, I think this spot would not be as high on this list as it is. Everything about this section of the game was just so freaky, and it was so weird to be inside what almost felt like a spider's nest. This is definitely one of those locations where you can't help but just get all the power switches on and get out of there as fast as possible. The subway power station is definitely going to seal its spot in the number 4 rank of the top 10 scariest rooms and locations. I think definitely without a doubt one of the scariest locations in all of Resident Evil is the castle prison cells in RE4. Oh yeah, and that Garrador doesn't help either. This was our first sight at the Garrador in RE4, and it's also when we have freshly made it to the castle, so it's very terrifying to witness this guy for the very first time. The original did this spot very well, and I really like the atmosphere of it as it's set in a little downstairs area, which makes it feel really secluded and scary. Also in the original, you actually have Ashley with you in the first Garrador fight, so you have to make a very wise decision on where you're gonna leave her during this fight. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the remake did the first Garrador fight pretty well, but you don't have Ashley with you, so that's definitely something that relieves you of quite a bit of stress. But the castle prison cells are making their way at number 3 on this list, and let's go ahead and get into number 2. Once again, a morgue makes its way into the top 10 scariest rooms and locations, and this time it is the RPD morgue in Resident Evil 2. Now, the morgue in the original Resident Evil 2 is pretty scary as well, because you get to a point where you gotta get the key card and then you get ambushed by zombies, or depending on which scenario you're playing, you can walk in there and you could be greeted with a bunch of liquors instead. But as big of a fan of the original RE2 as I am, the remake stands out to me a lot for this section of the morgue, because when you finally get that key that you need, which is of course laying next to this conveniently placed body, it pops out at you out of nowhere, and it also hits you with a tense and scary little soundtrack. Like I said previously, that morgue setting is something that just really sets you off as a player, to where once you walk in, you feel like you shouldn't be here, and whatever you may need in that room, you need to get as fast as possible. I just remember playing the game for the first time and opening up every single morgue thing and just waiting for something scary to pop out at me. Eventually, I got exactly what I was expecting, and that's why this is making its way into number 2 on this list. Now let's move on to number 1. In my personal opinion, the scariest room and location of a Resident Evil game is House B and Vito in the Shadows of Rose DLC. A lot like how the nurses react to light in Silent Hill, these mannequins react to your eyesight, so you have to make sure that you are watching them or else they can move freely. It becomes really scary when you have a bunch of these creepy looking mannequins all stalking you and you can't watch all of them at the same time. Resident Evil Village was scary itself, but I think their DLC actually takes the cake for the scariest location and setting that I've ever seen in an RE game. Also, because you don't have anything that can actually take out the mannequins, it makes it just that much scarier. But there we have it, guys. That's gonna go ahead and wrap up my top 10 scariest rooms and locations of Resident Evil. This was my personal top 10 list, so go ahead and go down in the comments and put down your guys' opinions and leave your top 10 scariest rooms and locations of RE, because I would really like to read them, and I definitely plan on responding to every single comment. I also gotta give a very special shout out to my one and only pro member, Ico Pro Sam. You guys could also become a member today, or subscribe for daily content. And with all that being said, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video tomorrow. Peace.